Hello and welcome. The title of the message today is, Are You Keeping Score? But let's begin by affirming together our opening statement. There is only one presence and one power in my life and the universe, God. And now I invite you to share with me a deep but gentle breath filling the lungs, holding it for a short time and then releasing it back to the universe. We relax into this moment, allowing that all is in divine order and that we are exactly where we're meant to be right now. And we open ourselves to Spirit, our teacher and our comforter. And we ask for the wisdom and understanding so that we might take from this message and our thoughts around this message just exactly what it is that we need to put to use in our life. And we are grateful for this opportunity. And so we say, Amen. So, are you keeping score? When we're born, we come into this world pure essence. And immediately, our education begins. By observing what's going on around us, we learn certain things about how to survive in this world, in the culture that we are born into. And immediately this essence begins to be covered up with a blanket, with a layer, with a filtering mechanism that is educated into us. We learn how to respond to what's going on around us. One of the first things we learn is the eyes of our caregiver. And we learn how to ask for that care by crying. But we also learn other things. We learn how to shape the field of energy that is always around us into things. We learn that whenever our caregiver's face is covered with a blanket, that caregiver is still there. It takes a while, but that's why peekaboo, which starts out to be so fun, ends up being an expectation. As the child, each one of us begins to learn. We learn how to respond to people who are around us. Everything we learn is not always helpful. We learn by the example of the people around us. We learn that certain things that happen are responded to with anger or hurt, with fear, with resentment. We learn to characterize. This is a survival mechanism. This learning process and these characterizations are what help human beings to survive in a world that can be very dangerous. But characterizations in themselves can grow and become dangerous to us. We reinforce characterizations by our filter, which sees the things we expect and ignores those things that are going on that don't fit with our expectation. And so the characterization grows. Are we keeping score? Is that what this characterization is? A keeping score? We learn to respond to individuals based on our characterization of them. These characterizations can be cruel. They can also be untrue. Some single event might happen that causes a thought around an individual. And then, by our filtering mechanism, we continue to see this same thing over and over again, ignoring other situations that would contradict this characterization. You've heard me share about how watching a movie can be a playground for observing ourselves. Well, another playground for observing ourselves, for me, has been my work. I spend a lot of time there and I interact with different people, and so I have lots of opportunities in situations that aren't always easy to observe how I respond to people and events. So, as I began to think about these characterizations and noticing opportunities for forgiveness, I began to observe my characterizations of the people that I work with. I'm not going to name names or really even go into behaviors because those are not the important thing. The important thing here is how I have taken these behaviors and internalized them and characterized different people. I can say that there is an expectation or a characterization of maybe someone for always being late in the morning. And notice that verbiage, always being late. And right off, that's a clue, because they're not always late. Sometimes it's true that they have been late, but they are not always late. And the characterization is that they are always late. And any time that we can look in our consciousness and see something like always, or we can hear it in our language, in our speaking with someone, you are always fill in the blank. When we hear this language in our thoughts or coming out of our mouth, it's a sign. We are in that mode of characterization, and we have not made a forgiveness. We may forgive this person for this perceived characterization and then still see it coming back. That's also natural. That part of us that was educated into us as a survival mechanism is going to continue to see this characterization. But that highest part of us, the observer within us, is able to say, oh, whoa, wait a minute. Monkey mind, personality mind, ego mind, I, the highest part of me, has forgiven this person. We know this characterization is only true some of the time, and we forgive those times. So you can just stop this. I see that it's going on. So this is the dialogue that we can have. This is the dialogue that we can have inside of ourselves when we notice these characterizations going on, which are a sign of some resentment that needs to be forgiven. How many times should I forgive my brother? 7, as many as 7 times? And Jesus said, no, as many as 70 times 7. Because these characterizations keep coming back. And we must remind ourselves we have forgiven. We remind that part of us that is still holding that characterization. This goes into looking at some things about ourselves. Some things about our level of consciousness. I'm going to speak to a model that we've been talking about now at least a couple of weeks. But before that, I'd like to share with you a joke. There was a nun, and she was teaching a lesson to little Mary. And the lesson was on sin and prayer and forgiveness. And when she finished with the lesson, the nun asked little Mary, "What do you need to do before God will forgive you?" And little Mary said, "Sin." So, when we look at a situation like this joke, we have to think about a couple of things. From a metaphysical point of view, from an inner point of view, from the idea of working towards our spiritual development into the fully Christed being that is our potential as human beings. What is God? In whom we live and move and have our being. The divine, which we are an expression of. And what is sin? Sin, turning our back on that divinity that is within us and going it alone. Sin, error thought. Let's think of it another way. Remember, I talked about that line that begins at our birth and moves through a time, perceived flow of time. And in each one of those moments, my fist represents the three-dimensional world that is moving through time. All right, so forget about the fist and the three-dimensional world that's going on around us. And let's look at the inner space. So, this same timeline, at any moment, may be vibrating in a place of what in this joke is being called sin, which would be a very low place on this line, this vertical line. Time is crossing this vertical line in any moment at different levels of vibration, of spiritual attainment, of self-awareness, of consciousness, different vibrations of being, all these different ways of describing what we mean by this progression. The ladder of divine ascent from sin to the realm of God, where we can be and know the presence of God at that moment. It is the times that we find ourselves at these lowest places that we have an opportunity for self-awareness. That observer part of us sees this going on, notices that level where we are, and begins to forgive. To remind that part of us that is the personality that was educated into us, that is not our essence, that we the highest part of us that is vibrating up here has already forgiven, so that we can let go and be free and see the progression as we climb that ladder of divine ascent. And that is why we have this world to practice in. Because every time we have this opportunity of seeing our characterizations and noticing what that does to our consciousness. And don't forget to check in with the body, because it's a sure sign that something's going on. When we notice a tension in our body, it might manifest as pain, a tightness, rapid breathing, because we're not opening our lungs to the air. And one of the best ways to begin climbing that ladder is just to take a deep breath. Jesus talked about this ladder in a passage that is often quoted as being let's just say, take it to hell. But I'd like to reinterpret this passage for you. So I'll be reading from the Gospel of Mark in chapter 7, and I'd like to read verses 17, 18, and 19. I'll read from the Lamsa translation. So beginning Matthew chapter 7, verse 17. So every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, neither can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree which does not bear good fruit will be cut down and cast into the fire. These trees that are bearing this fruit are our consciousness. Where are we in this ladder of ascent? Where is our level of consciousness? When our level of consciousness is down below, then we're the bad tree bearing bad fruit, because we get more of what we are thinking. That is what we're attracting into our life. But as we begin this progression, climbing the ladder of divine ascent, till we reach the realm of God, the place where we know the presence of God, now we are bearing good fruit. And not only are we attracting these higher experiences, these higher vibration levels of energy into our life, we share that same energy out into the world. Every tree that does not bear good fruit will be cut down and cast into the fire. That's our progression, these opportunities that we have to notice when we go into these lowest rungs on the ladder, are the opportunities that we have to take control away from those areas of our personality where these characterizations come from. And yes, we cannot. That highest part of us, which is the divine in us, cannot forgive us and raise our vibration level until we can experience that it's not in its highest place, that it is somewhere in between. These are our opportunities for spiritual growth. We cultivate the observer within us by noticing them, and then by doing the things such as taking a deep breath, practicing denials and affirmations, the welcoming practice, so many different tools we have in our spiritual toolbox that will help us to climb this ladder into the higher regions of consciousness where we know the presence of God. And so that's our invitation as we go through our life this week, to notice when we find ourselves in a time of characterization. We might notice it because our body is holding attention that's at a different place. We might notice it by our words and thoughts saying, you always You always do this. And invariably, that's an exaggeration, an overcharacterization. But that's how this personality, this survival mechanism tends to work in human beings. We can notice that. We can forgive. We can remind that part of us that we have already forgiven. Let's close by praying our prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever I am, God is. Thank you.